I was just about to drift off to sleep when my phone buzzed. It was my sister's son calling me at a time he never would. My heart skipped a beat as I answered, fearing something was wrong. But what he said next, it made my pulse race in a way I never expected. In that moment, everything between us changed, and there was no going back. The night was unusually quiet, the kind that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I had just settled into bed, the soft hum of the ceiling fan lulling me towards sleep when my phone lit up on the nightstand. I blinked at the screen, surprised to see my sister's son's name flashing there. It was nearly midnight. He had never called me this late before. Concern immediately tightened my chest. Was something wrong? Was he hurt? Without a second thought, I grabbed the phone and answered, my voice thick with worry. "Hello, are you all right?" I asked, sitting up straighter in bed. There was a pause on the other end, long enough to make my stomach twist into a knot. Then finally his voice came through, low and hesitant. "Auntie, I did not know who else to call," he said. I felt the weight of his words settle into the silence between us. He sounded so vulnerable, so different from the confident young man I had watched grow up. "Tell me what is going on," I urged gently, trying to keep my own nerves at bay. He exhaled a shaky breath. I just needed someone to talk to, someone who would not judge me. I relaxed a little, though my heart was still pounding. He was reaching out, not for help in a crisis, but for connection, for understanding. "You can tell me anything," I said softly. "You know that." Another long pause. I could almost picture him sitting somewhere in the dark, wrestling with himself over whether to speak the words aloud. Finally, he whispered, "Can I come over?" There was a tremor in his voice that made my heart ache. Without hesitation, I answered, "Of course. Any time." I stayed up, sitting on the edge of my bed, waiting. Every passing minute heightened my anticipation. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he struggling with something at home? Had he broken up with a girlfriend? Was he scared about his future? The knock on the door was soft but urgent. I hurried to open it, and there he stood, tall, disheveled, eyes wide and glassy under the porch light. Without thinking, I reached out and pulled him into a hug. He clung to me tighter than I had expected, like a boy lost in a storm. "It is all right," I murmured into his shoulder. "You are safe here." We stood like that for a long moment, the cool night air wrapping around us. When we finally pulled apart, I led him inside, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air between us. He dropped onto the couch heavily, running a hand through his hair. I sat across from him, giving him space, but staying close enough so he would feel my presence. "You want to talk about it?" I asked carefully. He hesitated, then shook his head. "I do not know how." "Start anywhere," I said, offering a small reassuring smile. "I am not going anywhere." He looked at me, then really looked, and there was something raw and searching in his eyes that made my breath catch. "I feel like no one sees me," he said finally, voice thick with emotion. "Not really, not for who I am." The honesty in his words sliced through me. I understood that feeling more than I cared to admit. "You are not invisible to me," I said quietly. "I have always seen you." His gaze held mine, and in that moment the room seemed to shrink around us, the rest of the world fading into nothing. There was only the two of us, suspended in a fragile bubble of understanding and unspoken emotions. I could feel the ground shifting under our feet, could sense that whatever bridge we were crossing, there would be no way back. And yet I could not look away. Neither could he. The seconds stretched out between us, heavy with meaning. And then slowly, cautiously, he reached out, his fingers brushing against mine where they rested on my lap. A spark, a jolt. I froze, breath catching in my throat, unsure if I should pull away or lean in. But the look in his eyes anchored me, pleading, vulnerable, full of something deeper than mere impulse. I did not move. I could not, because in that moment I realized I had been just as lonely as he was. He did not move his hand away, and neither did I. The contact was so simple, so innocent on the surface, but underneath it thrummed with an electric current I could feel in every part of me. He shifted slightly closer, his knee brushing against mine. My mind screamed at me to set boundaries, to remember who he was, who I was supposed to be to him. But my heart had different ideas. "Are you sure you are all right?" I whispered, my voice barely louder than the ticking clock on the wall. He nodded, but his hand tightened slightly around my fingers, grounding himself, or maybe grounding both of us. "I am better now," he said. "Now that I am here with you." There was something heavy in the air between us. A tension neither of us dared to name, but both of us felt. Slowly, almost shyly, he leaned his head against my shoulder. I sat there rigid at first, unsure of what to do. But then I allowed myself to soften, resting my head gently against his. It was just comfort, I told myself. Just two lonely souls finding solace. But when I turned my face slightly, meaning to say something, anything to break the spell, he lifted his head at the same moment. And suddenly we were face to face. His eyes, dark and earnest, searched mine with a vulnerability so deep it made my chest ache. I could feel his breath on my lips, short and warm and full of unspoken need. Time seemed to slow, the world shrinking down to the space between us. A choice hung in the air, thick and dangerous. He moved first, a tentative brush of his lips against mine, feather light, like he was asking a question he was too afraid to say aloud. I froze. Every fiber of my being screamed that this was wrong, that I should pull away, remind him and myself of the boundaries we should never cross. But then he pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine with a raw, desperate hope. I am sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I should not have." Before he could finish, I made a decision I would never be able to take back. I leaned forward and closed the distance between us. Our lips met again, this time deliberate, lingering, full of all the aching loneliness, all the unspoken emotions we had both buried for so long. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of need, of comfort, of two broken hearts finding each other in the darkness. His hands came up, tentative, framing my face as if I might shatter. I felt his fingers trembling slightly against my skin, and the tenderness of the gesture undid me completely. We pulled apart just enough to rest our foreheads together, breathing each other in, hearts pounding wildly in our chests. "I do not want to lose you," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You are the only one who makes me feel whole." I closed my eyes, feeling tears burn at the edges. "I am here," I whispered back. "I have always been here." He pulled me into his arms then, holding me tightly against him, and for a long moment we just stayed like that. No words, no expectations, just two souls clinging to each other in a world that had too often left us feeling unseen and unwanted. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. It was hard to tell. Eventually he leaned back slightly, looking at me with an intensity that made my breath hitch. "I should go," he said, though his grip on me did not loosen. "Before I do something even more foolish." I managed a small sad smile. "Maybe it is not foolish," I said quietly. "Maybe it is exactly what we both need." His eyes widened slightly, as if he dared not believe what he was hearing. "You really mean that?" he asked, voice. I nodded, though fear churned in my stomach. Fear of what this meant, of the lines we were crossing, of the consequences that would surely come, but also hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, something beautiful could grow from this brokenness. He cupped my cheek gently, his thumb brushing away a tear I had not realized had fallen. "You are so beautiful," he whispered almost reverently. "You have no idea." I let out a shaky laugh, the sound brittle in the heavy silence. "It has been a long time since anyone said that to me," I admitted. "Then they were blind," he said fiercely, his hand sliding down to rest over my heart. "Because you are the most beautiful person I have ever known. Inside and out." The sincerity in his voice undid me all over again. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes, letting myself feel it, really feel it, for the first time in so long. And when he kissed me again, there was no hesitation, no fear. Only two hearts beating in fragile and perfect sync. We stayed like that, wrapped up in each other, until the first light of dawn began to creep in through the windows. Reality would come soon enough with all its messy complications. But for now we had this moment, this small perfect sliver of time where nothing else existed but the way he looked at me, as if I was the only thing in the world that mattered. And for the first time in a long time I let myself believe it. The morning light was merciless. Where the night had cloaked everything in comforting darkness, the day exposed every raw nerve. He stirred beside me, and I instinctively pulled the blanket tighter around myself, as if that thin layer of fabric could shield me from the overwhelming reality. What had we done? The question hung heavy in the silence, louder than any words could have been. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face, his movements unsure. He looked so young in that moment, so vulnerable, and it twisted something inside me. He started, then stopped, swallowing hard. I should probably go. I nodded, unable to find my voice. Part of me wanted to reach out to pull him back, to wrap us both in the bubble we had created the night before. But the other part, the part that remembered who I was supposed to be, the role I had always played, knew better. He stood, gathering his jacket in his hands, hesitating by the door. I could feel him wanting me to say something, anything. But I stayed silent, trapped in the prison of my own fear and guilt. When the door finally clicked shut behind him, the house felt impossibly empty. I wrapped my arms around myself and sat there staring into nothing. Had I ruined everything? Had I let a moment of weakness destroy the bond one had cherished for so long? The self-recriminations came fast and merciless, a torrent of doubt and shame. He deserved someone closer to his age, someone who could give him a future without the baggage I carried, someone who was not bound by the complicated ties that we shared. And yet, the way he had looked at me, the way he had held me as if I was something precious. It was so long since anyone had made me feel that way. The phone rang, jolting me from my spiral of thoughts. I hesitated before answering, half hoping it would be him, half dreading it. It was not. It was my sister. Her voice was light and casual, asking if I was free to come over for dinner sometime soon. She had no idea what had happened between her son and me, and the guilt of that knowledge pressed down on my chest like a stone. "I will think about it," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. When the call ended, I sank back into the couch, feeling the walls close in. There was no easy way forward. Every choice was tangled in consequences I could not even begin to untangle. I wanted to believe that what had happened was real, that it had meant something. But I also knew that love, if that was even the word for it, was rarely enough on its own. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions of normal life, but inside I felt hollow. I replayed that night over and over in my mind, the look in his eyes, the trembling of his hands, the way he had whispered my name like it was something sacred. Was it just desperation? Was it just loneliness finding a temporary anchor? Or was it something deeper, something neither of us had the courage to name? One evening, as I was folding laundry, there was a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. I knew it was him before I even opened it. He stood there, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, looking uncertain and heartbreakingly earnest. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside wordlessly to let him in. We sat opposite each other on the couch, the silence stretching unbearably between us. "I cannot stop thinking about you," he said finally, his voice rough. "About that night, about how right it felt." Tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. "That does not make it right," I whispered. "It does not erase everything complicated about it." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "But I do not care. I care about you. I want to be with you." The sheer sincerity of his words shattered something inside me. I had spent so long telling myself that love was supposed to fit into neat little boxes to make sense. But maybe it did not. Maybe real love was messy, complicated, terrifying. He reached across the space between us, his hand finding mine. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time allowed myself to see not just the boy I had watched grow up, but the man he had become. A man who was choosing me despite everything. Maybe the world would never understand. Maybe it would tear us apart. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the truth beating in my heart. I loved him. I squeezed his hand, a silent answer to the question he had not dared to ask. And as he pulled me into his arms once more, I finally allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward together. The days that followed were a mixture of tenderness and uncertainty. We knew the path ahead would not be simple. There would be questions, judgments, perhaps even anger from those we loved. But for the first time in years, I woke up each morning with a sense of hope blooming quietly in my chest. He was steady, patient, never pressuring me. Instead, he made space for me to breathe, to choose freely without fear. I realized that love, true love, was not about fitting into society's neat expectations. It was about finding someone who saw you completely and still chose you anyway. One evening we sat on my porch, watching the sun dip low against the horizon. The colors bled into one another, brilliant and chaotic, just like us. He turned to me, a soft smile playing on his lips. "I do not care what anyone says," he murmured. "You are my home." Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they were tears of peace, not regret. I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the solid beat of his heart under my cheek. The road ahead would be messy, filled with hard conversations and fragile beginnings. But we would walk it together, hand in hand, heart to heart. And somehow I knew we would find our way. Because when love is real, it does not ask for permission. Simply is.